Namaste and welcome to Frob Wellbeing Book Club. Friends of Books, or what is lovingly also called Frob, is a community of book lovers with presence all over India and across several other countries. Frob app is buzzing with meaningful engagement amongst readers who exchange their learnings about books, recommend books to each other, and engage in talks and discussions around them, talks which are delivered by authors themselves, like it is today, or some other experts in the field. They buy books assured by Frob, and they also create and join book clubs. Wellbeing is one such book club that I have the honor of starting here at Frob. You too can create and join the app and create your own book clubs. So watch out for the link to join Frob app in the chat box. So why are we really talking about well-being today? Well, friends, much before happiness had become a popular buzzword, well-being had always been the mainstay of wholesome life experience. It is an expansive phenomenon that goes beyond satisfaction, good health, physical wellness, or happiness. It is about fulfillment, about serenity, about contentment, about meaning and purpose in life, about curiosity, creativity, hope, and resilience. In fact, it is very closely associated with mental health. Friends, it is a very deep and multi-layered topic, and we will have more talks in the times to come. For today, we have chosen to focus on an integral element of well-being called resilience. In times like these, when the air has been heavy and thick with loss, trauma, and adversity, resilience holds much greater importance than ever before. And this is why today we are holding a talk on a very inspiring book on resilience called Building Resilience with Appreciative Inquiry. And I have the honor of introducing the co-authors, Dr. Joan McArthur-Blair and Dr. Jeanie Cockell, to us today. Joan and Jeanie are international appreciative inquiry practitioners who specialize in positive change at individual, leadership, and organizational levels. They have actually co-authored 2 books. So here are the 2 books. And for those interested in applying appreciative inquiry in higher education, this is the book for you. And today they will take us through this very insightful and inspiring book. And with this, I invite Joan and Jeanie in. So Joan and Jeanie, the popular connotation for AI is artificial intelligence. And you are today talking about appreciative inquiry. May I begin by telling the audience about my little story, our little story of how our friendship began exactly 11 years ago in the April of 2012. So,
Please.
Yeah, and Joan, particularly, the story is with you. So it was, friends, in the April of 2012 that we first met at the World Appreciative Inquiry Conference, where we both were presenting. I think I was presenting 3 sessions. I guess you two were presenting 2 or 3 sessions. And we were all serving together on the International Advisory Board of the conference. And it just so happened that after attending one of the sessions that Joan and Jeanie had done, Joan and I, we happened to meet outside after the session. And we got talking about our respective work in the appreciative inquiry space in different parts of the world. And we realized that we had much in common about what we wanted to do with appreciative inquiry, take it to the experiences which are not quite appreciable, so to say, and experiences which are dark experiences of life, and give it a frame of resilience, give it a frame of meaning. And in that, as we got talking, I just, Joan asked me, so how did you like our session? So I shared with her what I had picked from their session. And then I said, you know what, Joan, sitting in your session, this is how I felt. She said, what? I said, I felt very alive. And she said, what do you mean by that? Say more. So I said, I felt A for appreciative, L for loving, I for in inquiry mode, V for visionary, and E for emergent. So I said, here's an acronym for you called Alive, and use it the way you want to. And I was so happy and grateful to find the mention of it on page 93 of their book when I read it. And of course, they have given a very expansive, form to the whole Alive framework. And I would be wrong to claim any kind of credit for having gifted this acronym to them, because this is how I just felt in the moment while going through their session. So this is my tiny story with the book. And then I had the privilege of reviewing it, writing a book appreciation on it for the International Journal of Appreciative Inquiry, the only international journal of appreciative inquiry, which is called AI Practitioner. For those interested, I will be sharing links of this book appreciation in the Frob app. So please do look for that. So Joan and Jeanie, please begin by telling us some bit about appreciative inquiry and why you chose this as the guiding philosophy for your framework of appreciative inquiry. Over to you.
Yes, and I'll take it on here because I want to also acknowledge that we appreciate where we are in the world, and it's very far away from where you are. It's Saturday morning there, and it's Friday later. I will be usually going to bed at this time, but I want to acknowledge that in Victoria, British Columbia, in Canada, where we live, we also honor the land of the First Nations people here, who are known as the Lekwungen-speaking people, also as the Songhees and the Esquimalt. And we like to acknowledge that the history and the care for this land for many, many centuries before we were here, as people coming from Europe or whatever part, India, Africa, all sorts of places in the world. So I just want to acknowledge the value of this space that we get to work and live in. And so that's kind of an appreciative stance, right? It's a way of looking at the world from a view of the best of what there is around you. Because the appreciative inquiry really, as it was developed by David Cooperrider and others, is really about a way of helping human systems see and be in the world that will be the best that they can be. So it's a way of being and a way of doing or seeing. And the appreciate, if we break it down, means that you look around you and you say, what is it that I value? Because appreciate means to value. But it also means to increase in value, as a house would, appreciate in its value over the years. And as you value something, it actually, because you're paying attention to it, it does increase in value. And as well, though, appreciate also means to be fully aware of all that is around us in the world. And all of this awareness and the valuing really is about the best in the system we're working within, whether it's our individual self or a team or an organization. And the inquire, of course, means to be curious, to engage in dialogue, just as Neena has done, tell a wonderful story that links into what we're talking about this evening or this morning. So that notion of telling and listening to those stories, asking questions, and again, about the best of what already exists in whatever system we're examining.
And so Jeanie and I have worked as appreciative inquiry practitioners for many, many years. And we saw the power of appreciative inquiry to help people seek to understand what they were good at in the world and what more they might do. And so we took those ideas of appreciative inquiry, which is an entire field of study. We've given you a very brief definition this evening. But we took those ideas and began to think through what would those ideas offer to the conversation of resilience. And we went out and we interviewed leaders about resilience who were appreciative inquiry practitioners. And we were interested and what you see in the center of this circle. So with appreciative inquiry surrounding it, we were interested in how people experience the states of hope, despair, and forgiveness as they thought through appreciative resilience in the world. And so that's what we're going to talk about this evening. Of course, that's what our entire book is about. How it is we can take the power of appreciative inquiry into resilience. Jeanie, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that outer circle, which was representing the appreciative inquiry, all the varieties, as Joan says, of the different kinds of ways that appreciative inquiry can be applied and can just be. You can be an appreciative inquiry person. And all of that is really what we were, that's our background, and same with Neena, right? And we found that where people were, as we were doing some consulting, like strategic planning or team building or some specific actual reason for why people were getting together and to solve maybe a problem, but do it through appreciative inquiry, we found that there was more that was happening and that people were saying, wow, is this all part of it? We're getting our strategic plan, but we're also working so well together. And we're seeing each other and we're supporting each other. And that's where Joan and I kept thinking, well, there's a layer of resilience there, that people are actually increasing in their ability together and individually to be resilient. So then we thought, well, why don't we look more? And that's where Joan described that we interviewed leaders who used appreciative inquiry, and they found the same thing. And we interviewed them around the concepts that Joan is going to start talking about, starting with hope. But they also said what happened when we use appreciative inquiry and how that really does impact resilience. And so we called it appreciative resilience, because the power of appreciative inquiry on building resilience. That's why we called the book that too. So Joan, do you want to do hope?
We're going to spend time unpacking these three ideas of hope, despair, and forgiveness. And I'm going to start with hope in a second. When we first started working in resilience and really studying resilience, which has been a long arc study for Jeanie and I, we've been doing it for years and years. We really thought about the relationship between hope and despair and that movement between those two things. And as we interviewed leaders, we realized that there was a third very integral idea that was important to appreciative resilience, and that was forgiveness. And if you think about these, this diagram is very static, right? But if you think about these three circles in your own life, they're increasing and decreasing in size all the time, in the ways in which you're experiencing them in the world. So let's start with this idea of hope. So Jeanie and I think that hope is this incredibly powerful and generative force in the world. And when we talk about hope in relation to resilience, we're not talking about that things are going to turn out okay, that things are going to be all fine. We're talking about the abiding practice of hope that seeks to understand, no matter what the circumstance, there are deep things to turn your gaze toward to help you understand hope in the world. And we see that iconically in places like, in authors like Viktor Frankl, who, of course, sought to understand the nature of humanity within the Holocaust. It's that understanding of hope. And because we think about hope as the resilience bank, if we undertake to practice hope and a hopeful view in the everyday of our lives, to ask ourselves when we go to sleep at night, how did I foster hope for myself? How did I foster hope for others? It helps us build the resilience to understand something in the same way that Viktor Frankl understood that there was humanity in incredibly terrible circumstance in the Holocaust, there was still humanity there. There was still hope. So this is the first idea of appreciative resilience, hope, and how we undertake it as a practice of resilience.
As this, as you were talking of hope, I got reminded of a concept that in fact, I think it's a story more than a concept that I read in your book. I think it's on page 65, if I remember right. It's the story of the gardener metaphor that you have shared, and and with this, I think you also underline your emphasis on hopefulness as much as on hope. So tell us something about the gardener metaphor story.
Well, I think for me, and I grew up on a farm, and so this idea of the gardener metaphor is really important to me because I understood as a child the nature of hope. Because I'm sure some people listening have farmers in their family, and when the hail comes, when the wind comes, when it destroys the crops, when farmers are, bowed but not broken in their work, they plant again. They understand how to undertake hope. And right now, where I live in Canada, I'm planting my seeds for the summer here. And as I plant those seeds, it is a practice of hope. I don't know if they will grow. I don't know if my garden will be perfect. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. But each one of those seeds that I put down into the ground represent an incredible amount of hope. And so I think that that's a very kind of powerful way to think about hope with that metaphor of gardening.
Despair. Despair is often where people really want to find out more about first, because it's kind of a taboo subject. We don't talk about despair with each other. And it's important to do that, is to actually get that conversation going. Because despair, when in our first book, we wrote about it as challenging times. And yes, that's a focus of it, of course. But despair is much bigger than that. There's many things that take us to despair. And it's when the challenges of life has really brought us to our knees. And how do we rise up again? Well, it's as we say, it's not something that you can necessarily just get rid of very quickly. Like Joan always tells the story, it's like a bad house guest who comes and stays and won't leave, and it makes a mess, and you have to kind of just live with it until they're eventually gone. So you don't know when despair is gone many times. And as Neena writes about grief and growth and grace, I mean, she's talking about that very deep despair of grief. And we, in this model, really say it's important to look at not so much the despair itself, but to focus on how through those kinds of times, challenging times, despair, grief, have we used our strengths? And this is where the Appreciative Inquiry comes in. It's, well, how do we use our strengths to continue on and to reside as we live through despair? And I just want to go back to your reference in your first story, Neena, about the Alive model, which I'd forgotten about that story, which is really cool because it's such a powerful model. And in our first book, in Higher Ed, we talked about it in our chapter on Appreciative Inquiry through challenging times. And my story of getting to that Alive, and Joan and I got there together to write about it, because it has to be an acronym that has, in our minds, we wanted something that had appreciative inquiry in it. So the A was appreciate, and then the I of the Alive was inquiry. But in between was the L, which was love. And then afterwards, because we were talking about getting through challenging times, so you need to be able to appreciate, love, and inquire in order to do the last two pieces. The V is venture, take a step forward, and the E as we evolve. because as people, we're always evolving. As we go through these times of despair, we don't stay the same. We evolve into our future, but we do it by the notion of appreciating, loving, inquiring, so that we can take those steps. We can venture forward into our evolution. A question for me, Neena, about despair?
So actually what I had in mind to ask you, you've already spoken about that. I wanted
Okay.
because I read somewhere in your book, I don't recall the page exactly, where you made an emphasis on not just navigating through despair, not just going through despair, but living well with it. So
Yes.
you have already answered in some way. So I think you can go on with the next pillar.
Before I go on to forgiveness, I wanted to add one other thing about despair. Jeanie and I are educators. And so we were really interested not in the stories of despair themselves, although those are powerful stories, but the real, as Jeanie said, the focus on the strengths, how no matter how small in times of despair. And I'm going to tell a quick despair story. 13 years ago, actually just this week, Jeanie was in an incredible car accident. She was very, very badly damaged, and they were not sure whether she would live or walk. And she's totally fine now, just to kind of relieve you of the anxiety of the story. But I was home, and Jeanie didn't come home. And so I was left calling hospitals to find her, and I did find her. And they said a social worker will be waiting for you. And we have all have that moment. Like when I say that, I can feel it in my heart, and you can feel it in your heart too. Those moments of despair where we have no idea what the outcome is going to be. And it challenges our very being, and it changes us. So 2 circles: hope, the practice of hope and a hopeful view, the garnering and fostering of strengths in times of despair. And then we have this idea, this 3rd circle, forgiveness.
Can I interrupt?
Go ahead, Jeanie.
I just want to say the strengths I used in that hospital, when several days later I woke up and I had a titanium nail in my left femur, and I was intubated, I couldn't talk, I couldn't do a lot of things, but my strength of the practice of appreciative inquiry all the time, I looked around me and I saw people that loved me and people that were taking care of me. And I said, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know whether I'm going to live or die, but I am alive. And so that word alive came right and it made me happy, made me think I'm meant to be alive. So I'm going to continue on with my appreciative inquiry practice. So that's one of my strengths. It'll let me move through that challenging time. It was challenging.
And so forgiveness, the 3rd circle. When we went out and we talked to leaders and we interviewed leaders about the idea of hope and despair, this 3rd circle of forgiveness became more and more apparent. That in order to move from despair to hope, in this never-ending cyclical thing we do in our lives, was this idea of forgiveness. And by forgiveness, we don't mean that I'm going to go to someone and say, I forgive you. You know, we say that forgiveness is an inside job, that it really is about how we feel in the world. We think it is a powerful act of will to forgive. And it allows us the capacity to venture and evolve, because we come to deeply understand that we can't rewrite what has happened. We cannot change the past that we have experienced. And So we talk about forgiveness as an act of will, talk about hope as a practice, focus on strengths and despair as a practice, but forgiveness as an act of will. And we always joke about forgiveness that it's one of those undertakings that you get to do over and over again. You know, you come to that place of forgiveness, and then guess what? You wake up tomorrow morning and you get to do it again. But it doesn't always stay with us, and it makes it such a complex thing. So these three ideas, I'm just going to go backwards to this place. And I'm going to let Jeanie join in here. So these three ideas embedded in this appreciative, to value what is, to be relentlessly curious about what might be. These three ideas, these three practices and an act of will build this idea of appreciative resilience. And we believe that resilience is a practice. It's something that we actually get to practice every day. It's not something that some of us are and some of us aren't. We don't know what's going to be called on, what we will be called on to endure. And we don't know how the world will affect us. It's a practice. It's not something we get to be good at. It's something we get to practice. Neena, you might have a question about forgiveness, but I want Jeanie to add anything to forgiveness that she has before we go to your question.
No, I think you really got it. So it's over to Neena.
So, I find your emphasis on forgiveness brave and exceptional. I know it is not an easy journey. Whenever people read my book on grief, I think many people, the first question they have is about the chapter on forgiveness. That, how can you even think of forgiveness in the context of grief? And resilience is not just about grief, but loss, trauma, adversity of all kind that you're talking about. So tell us, your story of how you came to think of forgiveness in the context of resilience. And why I'm so curious about your approach to resilience is about a sentence that I read in your book on page 108. Please allow me to read it from the book for the benefit of readers, where you say that it's a determination to see that others both deserve forgiveness and do not deserve forgiveness, and to offer it up anyway. I mean, this sentence, I think I just lingered over it for days together before I could move to what the book had to, offer thereafter. So I almost meditated on these words. So say something about what inspired you to bring focus on forgiveness in the context of resilience.
We as we talk to people, as they talked about moving through their despair, moving through their challenging times, they talked about forgiveness. They talked about letting go. They talked about finding a place of equanimity. And forgiveness is such a powerful word. And Jeanie and I struggled with using it, and yet it was the right word. And we worked hard to think through forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about justice. It is not about absolution. Forgiveness is forgiving what you can in order for you to foster your own resilience. And so we didn't kind of start there in resilience. Jeanie started really thinking through the Alive model, and I was already writing on kind of the inner life, on the spiritual nature of resilience. And we really started to focus on challenging times, which really led us to deeply understand hope, interestingly enough. And then as people talked about that movement from despair to hope, and back and forth in a lifetime. They talked about forgiveness, about being willing to let go. Jeanie, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I want to emphasize that too, because I think the sentence you picked out is a very powerful one, Neena. And so much of resilience you can't get back to hope if you don't let go of holding on to those negative things about how you will never forgive that person because they were wrong. Well, that's never going to change. Only thing that can change is yourself, right? To say that's, and some people would not say the forgiveness word is too strong, right? You can't forgive. Well, maybe you can't, but you can just let go. And I think that's the key to getting back and staying on it with your resilience and the practice of resilience through the practice of hope. Is you've got to let it go first, and then you can start to see what those other possibilities are.
Somebody in the group just did a thumbs up to your comments there, Jeanie. I don't know if you saw it going by or not.
Yeah, also one of the questions in the chat box, so I will take
great
in a moment. And before that, so yes, I so kind of agree with what you say about forgiveness, and I would say forgiveness is more about yourself than about the circumstances or the person or the event that you're setting out to forgive. And I would say that forgiveness is as much about, or maybe before forgiving others, it is about seeking forgiveness. It is about offering forgiveness to yourself. Because, if not forgiveness, there's an imprisonment of oneself.
Yeah.
In the loop of regret, in the loop of guilt, in the loop of resentment, anger, and the sense of feeling wronged. And we are punishing nobody else except ourselves in the process.
Yeah.
So,
and I think Neena, your words are so powerful, that kind of imprisonment of despair. Without forgiveness, there is no door to leave despair, to diminish its power over us, and it is tough. Forgiveness is very tough. It's a very, very hard concept.
And as you say, Neena, sometimes self-forgiveness is the hardest.
The hardest.
Yeah.
I think at this moment in time in life, I'm caught up in a whirlpool of wanting to, but not yet being able to forgive myself on a wrong that I have committed, of the various wrongs, but this one particularly. Okay, so we'll shortly take in Hariharanji for something that he wants to ask you about. But before that, I would request Joan and Jeanie one more thing from your book before we take in the question or comment. That is that, you lay a lot of emphasis on the practice of resilience. For you, apart from resilience being a choice or an act of will, it is about practice. Forgiveness, you say, is an act of will, but forgiveness is also, a way of practicing resilience. So say something about that, and you also talk of creating an emotional bank of resilience. So say something about that, and then we'll invite Hariharanji.
Well, I think the key, the practice of resilience, is practicing hope every day. Because sometimes we think, we don't need to practice hope because everything's going fine. And yet, getting in that habit of focusing, and in despair, focusing on your strengths, right? Which is another way to have hope, because you've done it before, you use your strengths well. So I think and the same thing with forgiveness. All of these are abilities we have if we practice them, and they increase, but they don't stick sometimes because it can be overwhelming, right? And so then you have to self-forgive. You have to say, well, it's okay, I wasn't able to practice hope today, but it's always the practice of how can I get that hopeful view and keep it ongoing so that I can help myself through the despair and have the will to forgive.
Thank you.
And I think it's the training of altering our gaze. And I'll give you a really silly example. You probably can't see this on the screen, but this is a little wooden heart. And at the moment, I have a puppy. And the puppy chewed my wooden heart, which was quite precious to me, actually. And I thought, my heart is ruined. And then I began to alter my gaze. And I thought about the heart as so representative of how it is despair in particular changes us forever, but we're still a heart. And so, it's such a simplistic example, but I think this is how we practice. We practice by altering our gaze, by training our minds to see differently than our first reaction to something. It's part of the practice of resilience.
You just held my breath when you said, altering your gaze. Wow, what a perspective. So, Hariharanji, you have, I think, more than one questions in the chat box. May I request you to maybe talk about gratitude? Because
Thank you, Joan and Jeanie. So, I remember Peter Redding, he taught me coaching. He said, what you focus on expands. I think the last 27 minutes, I was just remembering him when he talked about those. So, a very simple question I have: how does gratitude play part in the resilience? Because forgiveness can happen only when you are gratitude personified. So, what are your views on this?
I believe gratitude. I do gratitude journal every day because I think it's a powerful force. It can alter my gaze, right? If I spend some time after maybe in the middle of the day or any time of the day, and suddenly, I've not been in that space. I've not been practicing the hopeful view. And I sit down and I look at my journal and I start to write within some of the despair, within some of the challenges, what I'm actually grateful for. It helps me to alter my gaze. And that practice is, for me, very powerful.
And I think gratitude so powerfully is one of the inputs to hope. And this, I think, is one of the things we tried to talk a lot about in our book, is that practicing hope and a hopeful view for one person might be a gratitude practice, because that's what polishes that hope stone for them. For somebody else, it might be a type of exercise. It might be time with family. And so all these things pour into that idea of hope and a hopeful view. They're the inputs that allow hope and a hopeful view to grow. So the power of gratitude is enormous, both in hope, but also, of course, in forgiveness.
So, Joan, there is one more very interesting question in the chat box that I will read out to you on behalf of Anita Bhutaniji. And so very quick answer to that before I have my final request to you, which I will just say in a minute. The question is, Anita wants to know that, is it possible that one keeps vacillating between one's own hurt and the experience of letting go? So one feels that one has let go and then one goes back to feeling hurt. And this is a question I face all the time, but today it's yours.
That's how it is for me. The more I practice, it doesn't get any better sometimes. Like it depends. You have to keep practicing.
And we don't mean to laugh, but yes is the answer. But I think what's powerful in the practice of forgiveness is the time period between the vacillation begins to grow until there's a day where you realize that you carry the hurt as maybe not a friend in your life, but a companion in your life that no longer has power. Hurt never goes away. The things that happen to us change us, but that vacillation gets longer. And that's the practice. That's what the practice gives.
Amazing. And if you allow me to just kind of add on quickly. So as you know that my book on grief also has a framework called Alive, in which L is letting go, letting. I call it just letting. And Anita ji, I would just say that, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Anita ji, I would say, I talk of 3 lets in my framework of Alive. And that is that before letting go comes letting sink. unless we have made peace with our hurt, unless we have acknowledged it and affirmed it and absorbed its impact on us, unless we have processed our feeling of hurt, whatever letting go happens would perhaps not be complete, and desolation will keep happening. And then, as Joan has beautifully explained, that the time slowly of desolation grows longer. And then, letting go doesn't get complete by itself. After letting go is letting come, letting in, because nothing happens in void. We have to fill the empty space with some matter, and if we have to fill it with some matter, why not fill it with something really meaningful, which is allow something new and meaningful and inspiring to come in the place of letting go. So letting go, please bring in two more friends, one before, which is letting sink, and one later, which is letting come. So with this, we come to the end of a very, very meaningful and beautiful and evocative session. I must thank you from the core of my heart and on behalf of the audience in the room for being up so late in the night for us here in the Pacific time zone. And it's now, 10:15 for you? 10:15 p.m. almost?
Yeah.
We can't let you go today without Joan reciting a poem for us from her book. And the readers, I must tell you, Frobians, I must tell you, one more thing which makes this book very, very special is each chapter begins with a beautiful, evocative, meaningful poem that Joan has created. And I say this not just because of a fellow poet bias. Those who read the book, they will really find a lot of meaning in the way chapters open with a poem. Over to you, Joan. Any poem that you want to read from the book.
Neena, would you like hope or would you like forgiveness?
Anything that is alive for you in the moment.
I think I'm going to read a poem on hope. One of the reasons we put the poetry at the beginning of the chapters was in some ways to help people define the ideas that we were playing with. My beautiful friend, hope, you point me toward the sun, you shelter me in the rain, you trumpet my successes and hold me in my sorrow, ever whispering, rise up, rise up. Neena, Jeanie, and I have so loved doing this. We're just honored to be invited into your book club.
Thank you so much, Joan and Jeanie. And I think it's been truly a privilege. 1st April, typically people celebrate as a Fool's Day. And I think today you have taken us on an inspiring, meaningful journey into resilience on this wonderful day. And this is truly your gift of spring to us. Thank you so much. And
thank you, dear. I was going to say thank you, dear Neena, because this is the well-being club of the book club, right? That you're doing. And I feel much better all over now doing this with you.
Thank you so much, all the Frobians who took time this morning to join this book club. A little earlier than usual. We normally have it at 11 a.m. India time. So thank you so much for taking time out. And I'm sure that this session must have been very meaningful and useful for you. And before we end, I must also add that although this book has been internationally recognized for the sound professional expertise it offers in the context of everyday life, leadership, organizational context, every which way, more than that, this is also, to me personally, a treasure trove of the lived wisdom that Joan and Jeanie bring on table, of the various adversities and trauma that they have encountered in life. Joan told us about Jeanie's life-threatening accident. It's, I think, less than a year ago that she's also she's undergone a massive surgery, which is life-altering thing. And how, with a smile of authentic appreciation, they continue striding on in life and continue inspiring the world. I'm very privileged to call Joan and Jeanie dear friends, and I encourage you all readers to reach out to them. We'll share their email IDs with those who want to reach out to them directly. And before that, I would encourage you to please join the Frob app and join the Wellbeing Book Club. The link is in your chat box. And we look forward to meeting you there. And that's all for today. Thank you so much and have a very bright, beautiful, resilient, and inspiring day ahead.